Hey, it's David. In today's video, we're going to be comparing old versus new Lionel trains. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at some old versus new Lionel rolling stock and locomotives, and even some old versus new Lionel track, and kind of show how stuff has changed over the years, what's new, what's different, what you like more about the old trains, and maybe what you like more about the new trains. Anyways, let's get started. Let's get started by taking a look at some rolling stock. On the track now are 3 Lionel N5C cabooses from 3 different Lionel eras. From left to right, we have a Lionel postwar caboose from about the mid-50s. Then we have a Canadian Pacific from about 1973, and all the way to the right we have a Southern Pacific from about 2018. First, we'll take a look at the difference between the trucks and couplers on each caboose. The postwar caboose is the only car here to have die-cast trucks, and although they lack in detail, they're pretty nice and robust. The wheels themselves are also a bit differently, having a bit flatter profile on the face of the wheel than the more angular, sharp face of the modern wheels, which give the modern cars a bit better rollability. The couplers are also a bit more robust, being die-cast metal, and they have these tabs that protrude kind of sideways compared to the tabs that protrude out kind of straight from the coupler. The trucks on the NPC car are pretty unique. They're made of plastic, but they have a lot of really nice detail, and they actually kind of show like a roller bearing detail, which I find pretty unique. The couplers are also made of plastic, and they don't hold together as well as the postwar couplers, but for the most part they're pretty solid. And lastly, the modern car also has plastic trucks with nice detailing. These represent a more standard style of truck with regular friction bearings, which fit a car for this era. Also have plastic couplers. Still pretty solid trucks, though. Detail-wise, all 3 cabooses are pretty much identical, except for my caboose here. It's missing an end platform, but for the most part, they should be nearly identical. But if you actually notice, the NPC era caboose has these separately applied marker lamps there that neither of the other cabooses have. When it comes to features, these cars are a little bit different. These 2 cars are lighted, whereas the Southern Pacific is not. As you can see, both cars have an insert so that you do not see the lighting on the inside, although the postwar one is a bit more transparent, whereas the NPC era has got like kind of a white color, and so it stands out very clearly. The modern car also has a clear insert, but it has no lighting on the inside. Printing and graphics wise, you can see as time goes on, it gets more and more advanced, from the postwar one with the pretty simple Lionel lines, text, number, and then the build date. Whereas you get to the NPC era, still pretty simple with the road name, number, printing date, but a little bit more graphics there. And then you get to the really beautiful modern Southern Pacific caboose with the beautiful herald in the middle and all the beautiful striping and everything. And you can kind of see the change in printing technique, starting with the rubber stamp and then moving on to the regular pad printing that is used nowadays. Next up, we're going to take a look at 3 different Lionel boxcars from 3 different eras. Starting from left to right, we have a Lionel 6464 series boxcars from the early 1950s. Then we have a Lionel NPC era car from about 1973. And then we have a Lionel modern era New York Central boxcar from about 2016. The differences between the trucks and couplers in these cars are pretty much identical to the cabooses. The postwars having the bar end trucks, the modern NPC cars with those unique plastic trucks there, but one exception with the modern car. As you can see, the modern Lionel boxcar has these really nice die-cast sprung trucks and a die-cast coupler. These are about the nicest Lionel trucks you can get, and it really gives this car a quality feel. These cars also feature some differences in detail and construction. Some details to note on the postwar car include the vertical lines of rivets that go all the way from top to bottom of the car, which have like kind of a square backing to them. The door detail is also significantly different from the other cars, and the door is held on by these metal strips which are riveted to the car body. The car body is also held to the frame with a screw. In the NPC car, those vertical rivet lines were eliminated. The door detail is significantly different, and the door is held on by a plastic guide with 2 little plastic pieces on the bottom to hold it onto the car. The car also is held together by tabs and not a screw. And with the modern car, we see a return to those vertical rivet patterns, but the construction is nearly identical to the NPC car. Next, we're going to take a look at 3 different gondolas from 3 different eras, starting on the left with that New York Central gondola from the late 1950s, next to the NPC era gondola from the early 70s, and finally with a modern gondola from around 2012. The trucks on the NPC and the modern era gondola represent types you've already seen before, the NPC era with those same plastic trucks, and the modern gondola with those die-cast sprung trucks. But the postwar car has some plastic trucks. Let's take a look at those now. Plastic trucks on the postwar car are unique in the way that their frame is completely cast in with no punch-outs where you can see through to the wheels. The roller bearings also actually say Timken on them, which I think is a nice detail. The 3 cars are nearly identical in detail except for one aspect. Let's take a look at that now. The postwar car lacks any kind of brake wheel detailing, although if you look right here, there is a spot where it looks like a brake wheel could have gone. The NPC car shows a bit of improvement with a molded-in brake wheel. The modern car showcases the best detail with a separately applied brake wheel. In terms of construction, each car is a little bit different. The postwar and the NPC car both have trucks that are riveted on, whereas the modern car's trucks actually are held on by a screw. The postwar car feels pretty robust, although the plastic shell is a little bit lightweight. The MPC car is very light due to the plastic trucks and plastic wheels, which I forgot to mention before, as well as having a pretty flimsy plastic body. And then the modern gondola is the most quality feeling with the die-cast metal trucks, which had a lot of great weight, as well as a very sturdy plastic body. Let's compare some locomotives. On the left, we have a Lionel Ontario Northland SD18 from the late 1970s, and on the right, we have a Lionel Norfolk Southern GP38-2 from 2017. Now, these engines aren't a perfect match for each other. They're both different prototypes, but we're going to be mostly comparing the features between the two. So since they don't share the same tooling, we will not be comparing features or construction or anything like that. The MPC locomotive is about as simple as it gets. It's got transformer-controlled forward, neutral, and reverse, as well as a headlight. Nothing flashy, very simple, but it was standard for the time. The modern engine, on the other hand, comes with line chief remote control, as well as directional lighting, rail sounds ready to run, as well as many other modern features which are standard for ready-to-run locomotives. Now, when it comes to comparing these locomotives, it's pretty much all about the features. In terms of detail and stuff, they're pretty much on par. The GP38's a little bit more detailed, but for the most part, they're pretty similar. Of course, though, the SD18's got transformer control, which was standard for the time, whereas nowadays we've come to expect all sorts of realistic features in our locomotives, even our starter set engines. Now, some people actually prefer that simpler transformer control, and that's kind of what's perfect for them with that past stuff. And a lot of people like the modern stuff with the remotes and the speakers and sound systems and lights, and that's great too. I think it's interesting to see the difference between these and kind of see how the standards and the hobbies have changed. But yeah, like I said, these engines are a little bit different. Obviously, the one on the right you'd think is better and more advanced, but some people prefer that simpler control. Next, we're going to compare two steam locomotives, both of which are Berkshires, and this should be a little bit more of a fair comparison. Again, although they don't share the same toolings, feature-wise, they're actually pretty close. We'll talk about that now. In terms of features, both engines are nearly identical. The postwar Berkshire includes an air whistle, a headlight, as well as a smoke unit. The modern Berkshire contains an air whistle, smoke unit, as well as a headlight. So, on the surface, they seem like they're pretty matching locomotives. But there is actually some distinct differences that, if you dig a little bit deeper, will be revealed. First, let's talk about differences between the motors. The Lionel postwar engine has a Lionel Pullman motor, an iconic aspect of Lionel postwar trains. The Pullman motor is renowned for being powerful and very serviceable, but it does have its drawbacks. First of all, it's not the most reliable motor out there. They definitely need some regular servicing. They're also pretty noisy. They're known for their growl. The modern engine has a CAN motor, a DC CAN motor. Although the CAN motors are pretty much standard with everything nowadays, some people like them, some people don't. I prefer them because they're quiet, and you don't really have to service them as much. Of course, with anything, you'll have to service it eventually, replace it, and stuff like that. That's the one thing about the CAN motors, is that you can't really open up and clean the armature and the brushes and stuff, which is pretty much standard motor maintenance. So that's why a lot of guys prefer the post-war Pullman motors to the modern CAN motors. But for the most part, the CAN motors hold up a little bit better, and they're pretty quiet, so they suit themselves better to modern applications. The post-war engine also has an E-unit, which kind of contributes to that post-war buzz sound. It also means that when you cycle through forward, neutral, reverse, that's at the hands of the E-unit, and it can be a little bit finicky. Whereas the modern engine has an electronic reverse unit, all part of those boards and stuff, which, again, some guys don't like the boards because they can go wrong. I'm not a big fan of the fact that if something like that goes wrong, if you don't know what you're doing, then there's not much you can do, whereas an E-unit is pretty serviceable. But again, just a little bit more reliable, makes things a bit easier. The lighting between the two units is also different. The post-war engine has an old incandescent light bulb, which you'd expect on an engine that age, whereas the modern engine has a LED light bulb. I think the comparison between these two engines is a bit more interesting because it's a little bit more fair. They're a little bit more similar when it comes to the features, but it's interesting to see how something which is nearly identical in features can be so different due to just the changes over time. Lastly, let's talk a little bit about the differences between Lionel Track. What I have on my layout here is Lionel Fast Track, the track system Lionel introduced in the early 2000s and eventually would become the standard for Lionel. This is included in everything from starter sets to just regular track packs. Now, Fast Track has its drawbacks and advantages. Advantages-wise, it looks pretty nice, especially compared to Lionel's old tubular track with the square rail profile, ballast, and ties. Some of the drawbacks, though, are because it's Lionel track, it's got steel rails to work with the magnet traction, which tend to corrode over time, and the track itself has a lot of resistance between the rails, which lead to power loss over time. Honestly, I used Fast Track because it was what I had a lot of because of starter sets, and I kind of regret it due to some of that power loss and resistance. I've had some issues with it in the past. I've struggled to keep my layout up. I've actually installed a feeder wire from one side of my layout to the other to negotiate some of that power loss, but it's been a lot of headache. So if I was to do another layout, I probably wouldn't use Lionel Fast Track. This is a piece of Lionel tubular track. It's basically what was standard from 1915 up until the early 2000s. This is obviously the most abundant type of Lionel track due to the fact that it's been produced for so long. It's very cheap, but it's also pretty cheap in terms of construction. As you can see, it's got 3 metal ties and then the metal rails with that tubular stamped sheet metal profile with those pins. Now this piece is in pretty rough shape, but a lot of people like tubular track because it's pretty reliable. It'll last you a long time. It's durable, and overall, it's a pretty simple track system. There's not a lot there to go wrong. Obviously, it's not the most realistic, but it was the standard for a long time, and a lot of people prefer it to this day. Alright, I hope you enjoyed taking a look at the differences between Lionel's newer versus older trains. I think it's interesting to see how they've changed over the years, and what kind of stay consistent, and what each era does best. If you like this video, please subscribe and leave a comment below. And if you want to see more stuff like this, subscribe to my channel. Thanks.